Okay, we're ready to go. Let's start the general government meeting for December 3rd. And Cindy, would you call a roll, please?
Councilmember Dennehy. Absent. Councilmember Maloney.
Here.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Here.
Councilmember Stein.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy. Absent. Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
Mayor Troutman.
Here. I'm arguing with Tim over the loss of his, he lost his cell phone and it was in his hand. He's already signed that, so. Okay, thank you. So this evening we're going to have discussions on front yard fence requirements and tiny homes. And we have our super qualified zoning director. Is that your official?
City planner.
City planner. So we plan to have you talk next.
Yes, and I apologize. You're probably going to get tired of seeing me. This is the third night this week.
Well, I was going to make mention of that, but no, you're fine.
What's the saying? Familiarity breeds contempt.
I think it is. Yes.
Yes. So I do apologize in advance.
No problem.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, this evening we are here to have a discussion session regarding two topics: front yard fence requirements and tiny homes. Regarding fence, oh, I probably better turn this on. There we go. So regarding fence requirements, fence regulations for front and side yard fences in residential areas are contained in section 1706.050 of the UDC. And specifically, if you look at paragraph B1, it talks about fences in front yard and side street yards shall not exceed 4 feet in height, and fences in front yards and side street yards shall be of non-site barrier construction and have a minimum opacity of 50%, which means they need to be 50% transparent. Now, there are some reasons associated with this. This is not new. These regulations have been in place for decades before we adopted the current UDC in 2021. So some of the reasons for why these provisions are there include, number one, tradition. The image of front yards and picket fences is a traditional American neighborhood design since really dating back to the 19th century. If you think about classic movies like The Wizard of Oz, you will recall they had a picket fence in the front yard, and that was supposedly taking place in the 1930s. So again, this is traditional American neighborhood residential form. Number two, an attractive streetscape. Municipalities differ from lower density areas, lower density rural areas, in that typical residential density allows for multiple residences per street block. Because of this, the streetscape becomes one of the attractive amenities associated with neighborhoods. And fence regulations are intended to reinforce this by not cutting off visual corridors between the public right-of-way and the front doors to homes. The third reason has to do with vision clearance areas. You'll recall that when Omnibus 5 came before City Council earlier this year, vision clearance areas were one of the items that were being amended in that ordinance, and it has to do with the driver's visibility off of the right-of-way not being impeded by something that could go up on private property on either side into their visible corridor. So we have done these front yard fence regulations to be in compliance with those vision clearance areas as they are reinforced otherwise in the code. And then finally, the ornamental nature associated with fences. Unlike fences that are intended to close rear yards for privacy, front yard fences are often treated as ornamentation in conjunction with landscaping. Property owners who are proud of their front yard landscaping often want fences to allow for people traveling on the street to appreciate the time and effort the homeowners have put into their yard. Those are the rationales associated with front yard fence regulations as they exist today currently in the code. So that's a discussion point for council as to whether you see it necessary to make any changes associated with this. The second item on the agenda today concerns tiny homes. Now, I have to admit, when I was told the discussion item for tonight was going to be front yard fences and tiny homes, I was unclear as to what the scope of the tiny home discussion was going to take. So in my staff memo, I kind of took a shot in the dark as to what council may want to discuss. I probably got it wrong, and if so, I apologize. This morning, I was in touch with our city attorney and had a conversation further about this subject. So I'm going to reference back to our code as it is now rather than talk about some planning standards, as I think I wrote into my staff report. So there are definitions for tiny home. I quoted the one from the American Planning Association in my staff report, but there's also a state statute definition that has been adopted by the state of Colorado as well. Essentially, even though there are some variances between these two definitions, they do tend to involve a residence that minimizes internal area in order to be efficient with the use of space internally and be more ergonomically designed. These are homes that are typically intended for occupancy by one, perhaps two people, but generally no more than that. The city currently has no definition associated with a tiny home. This is important, and I'll get into that momentarily. Canyon City's UDC is silent with respect to tiny homes. It contains no definitions. It does not prohibit tiny homes, but it also does not establish standards or regulations that would allow them to go in any place. Now, the reason this is important is our code does provide definitions for single-family homes. It provides definitions for modular homes, for manufactured homes, and for mobile homes. Tiny homes, not being given a definition, have no clarity with respect to where they fall. And believe me, all of these different kinds of uses have differing functions. So there needs to be a definition for tiny home at some point, whether we want to allow them or not. There's also a building department dimension to any discussion involving tiny homes, as it would require the adoption of tiny home criteria to the International Residential Code. When we adopted the International Residential Code, there was an appendix. I believe Catherine Sellers described it as Appendix Q, that the city did not adopt. That was one of the ones where we could adopt or not as the municipality sees fit. We did not adopt it, and as a result, we have no building standards with which to evaluate tiny homes either, whether or not they're to be put onto a permanent foundation, whether or not they're, we're going to allow them in terms of certain dimensions of room sizes. All of that's covered in that particular appendix that was not adopted. And because this is within the building code, we probably want to have the building official present for those conversations as well. Now, there is a need for some clarity to be applied to the UDC, definitionally, regardless of whether we decide to allow tiny homes or not. As there is some ambiguity in the code now, lacking a definition for tiny homes, it would be a good idea to include a definition for tiny homes and then make a distinction as to whether or not we want to allow them and where we want to allow them, if in fact we do. There has been some thought about, do we just say blanket across the board, no, we don't want tiny homes? Do we want to give some consideration for tiny homes might be acceptable in the case of an accessory dwelling unit? These kinds of standards as to if we are going to allow them, then how, in terms of the mechanics of locating them on site and getting them occupiable for humans, do we want to amend the building code then? So there is a knock-on effect to the first decision of, do you want to allow them under any circumstances? If the answer to that is no, then we can probably just do a definition for tiny homes and leave the code more or less as is. If we do want to allow them under certain circumstances, we're going to have a broader conversation about where and how and the mechanics of allowing them to come into play. So that is my more legal summary of what the code currently provides with respect to tiny homes, and that kind of concludes my presentation. So at that point, I'm going to open this up for discussion. If you've got any questions from council, I'm happy to answer those.
And I'm sorry. little add-on. I think we have Catherine on the line as well. Is that correct? Catherine, are you there?
I am.
Okay. In relation to that state definition of tiny homes, that is a unit that is on wheels. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is typically on wheels, but I think what Patrick was alluding to is that if the city wants to consider allowing tiny homes, a lot of communities require them to have a permanent foundation. That's not universal. Some communities allow them to remain on the wheels, and so that's part of the discussion. But tiny homes typically are on wheels. They're on a chassis of some sort. So,
But they could be site-built as well. So
they could be installed with a permanent foundation. They're a lot like a manufactured or a modular home because they're factory built and they're moved on site and then they're installed in a permanent foundation.
So you're not making a distinction at all. Tiny homes generally have been thought about because of the square footage and the cost per square foot of a house. So in order to bring it into an affordable area, a person, let's say 500 square feet, dramatically differ from a home of 1,400. So you're almost looking to put a square footage, a minimum amount of square footage in the code, which we don't have. So if I wanted to go build on a permanent foundation, a home of 500 square feet on a 50 by 120 lot in Canyon City, could I do that?
As the code currently exists, no, certainly not as the principal structure.
Well, why is that? In what way?
Well, as I said, at the moment, we do not define tiny homes. What we do define is a single-family home. And under that definition, I am not certain, and Catherine, please correct me if I misspeak, I don't believe a tiny home would meet the definition of a single-family home.
But you can,
I'd actually clarify. I think it probably does. I think the issue you run into is with the building permit or the building code. I'm sorry. That's where the issue may lie. And I don't have enough familiarity with the building code to be able to speak to that and what the requirements for foundations and how it's addressed. That's why the IRC in particular has a specific appendix to deal with tiny houses. It called it tiny houses. But I think that under the definition in the UDC, which is fairly broad and has no square footage in it, is my recollection, that yes, a tiny home would be considered. There's no minimum square footage in the UDC, but the building code, the IRC, is going to have some of that minimum square footage because by default, you're going to have certain things in a livable structure like bathrooms, and it just takes up a certain amount of square footage. Tiny homes or tiny houses are usually maxed out. There's not a minimum, there's more of a max because that minimum, like I just mentioned, just kind of defaults because of all the things you have to put in a home. And so tiny homes under state law are 400 square feet, so they wouldn't be above that. That's not to say the city can't change that definition. That just happens to be the current state definition. So if we were asked what a tiny home was, that's what we would rely on right now.
I think there's another distinction as well about whether or not it's stick-built versus being built in a factory. A lot of times when these homes are built in a factory, they fall under the Division of Housing, and the Division of Housing is using, they've adopted their own version of the IRC, and they're going through their own approval process. What we would do here is we would approve the foundation, and then that particular modular home that's built in a factory would then have its own stamp from the Division of Housing. Is that correct, Catherine?
I'm not sure that's quite accurate. Again, this is a great discussion that Kathy should be involved in because there is some distinction about the control of a local jurisdiction over its building and whether or not a tiny home is certified by the Division of Housing in circumstances where you have a building department that implements a building code for residents. So I think we need to go back and kind of figure that out a little bit more.
Yeah, we can confirm that with Kathy, who's out of the office this week.
I have a question.
well, okay. Well, Amy have your answers been questioned or questions been answered?
My understanding from local residents is that while there may not be a minimum square footage requirement in our UDC, there's a de facto minimum because of the requirements about length and width and setbacks, and it essentially means that you can't build a house that's smaller, even though we may not say that you can't build a house that's smaller. So from my perspective, at least, and it sounds like we may want to defer this to another meeting where Kathy is, or where Kathy is here. I was going to say building official Ulsh, but anyway, but my concern is I just want people to be able to build smaller houses, and like it's a much more cost-effective way for people to get into houses. I don't know why we wouldn't want that, and I just want us to be able to review our code and our requirements and make sure that people can build smaller houses.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and that's actually what I was getting at, is that right now, the way it stands, if you can accomplish the things that are required, as Catherine says, in a house, and can do that in 500 square feet on a permanent foundation, could we stop? We couldn't stop that.
That's right. Yeah. The only thing that comes into play that Councilmember Schmischer is referring to would be, a lot size setbacks. There are going to be some zoning issues. They probably, my guess is, wouldn't play too much into it depending on the circumstances, but you might have unique lots. You might have some smaller lots where maybe you couldn't put a tiny home if there was already a primary residence on the property, so like an ADU or something like that. But we can look at that and there's flexibility that can be built in if that's council's desire to figure out ways to allow these in creative solutions.
Yeah, there's a real kettle of worms that we're opening up here because of eventually the cost of building a house is going to shrink the size of the home so you can get some people to live in them. I mean, look at an apartment. The minimum I understand is 720 square feet for an apartment.
I've
So-
lived in smaller than that.
Have you? But that was in college, and you also ate ramen. But Kathy, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we keep talking about a foundation. There's a lot of houses that are on concrete pads. So if you start talking about putting in a foundation, that's going to raise your cost of that house quite a bit just because of the price of concrete. So are we not allowing things to be placed on a concrete pad?
It depends on the building. We allow for engineered foundations, so it depends on, what the requirements are from a building standpoint, or what will be supported from that. We say foundation, but it's the structure that it's sitting on, yes.
Well, let's start from the top. If we talked about fencing, or fences, is the discussion, are there any changes you want to make on that? I'll have a discussion on that first before we go into the tiniest of the houses, or tiny houses. Will you shake-
I'll start with fences.
Go ahead.
So I think the big concern about changing our front yard, side yard fence requirement, I don't think should change because, you have neighbors, and your neighbor might not want a 6-foot fence in their side yard on the front of the street. You have to be cognizant of the people around you. So even though you want a 6-foot fence, I don't want to stare at a 6-foot fence next door. That's just my opinion. That's the only reason, other than aesthetics, that I think it's a bad idea.
Amy?
So I have, I guess, a couple of different thoughts on fences, and I am really hoping that we can talk about all fences, front, side, and back, because I think we still have the same issue with the backyard fences that we had when we had these conversations 2 years ago. Like, unfortunately, the deer problem has not resolved. So we still have people who can't grow things in their backyards because deer jump the 6 feet fence. So I would really like to be able to have a conversation about backyard fences as well, but I understand that that is not on the agenda. I guess from my perspective, I don't have an issue with the default being, no, it shouldn't be more than 4 feet tall and it should be 50% opaque. But I do think that we have, as Catherine alluded to in the previous portion of this conversation, we have a lot of really unique lots and a lot of really unique building placements. And like, we didn't have very standard code for many, many years. So I would also want people to be able to seek an exemption, because if, based on where their house is on their lot, like, they should be able to have a fenced place for their dog to be let outside, or they should be able to have flexibility. Because I think that we are definitely not a cookie cutter planned neighborhood that was built over the past, 40 years. We're one that has a lot of character. So I would want people to be able to come in, have their neighbors' consent, obviously, but be able to seek exemptions for individual unique circumstances.
Yeah, on unique lots, we do have a Board of Adjustments process to allow for those differences, and we, over the last few years, we've had a couple that have come in to seek that type of exemption.
So our UDC already has that process, and we direct people to that when they need
Yeah,
a
if-
variance.
if there's a unique situation, absolutely. We've had situations, and Patrick, you probably better off to talk about some of those situations. I think we've had some of those smaller lots that they address to one street, and their front yard takes off of a different street, and we've sent some of those to Board of Adjustments before.
That's good to hear. I'm also just staying strictly with what's on the agenda. And maybe this is already in the UDC as well, but I'd love it if we could have more flexibility on what the materials could be as approved by whoever is approving the permit. I think that you see a lot of really interesting materials being used and a lot of artistic interpretations of what a fence could be. And obviously, we want things to be safe and to a certain standard, but I think that if you had an approval process in there, I don't know why we need to limit it to 6 very specific things that a fence can be made out of.
So we actually do have a provision for fences in interior side and rear yards, where it also allows for fence materials as approved by the zoning administrator. And I
Awesome.
thought we had changed it for front yard fences as well in a previous omnibus ordinance.
So it may already be, that flexibility for folks may already be there, but we need to
I think that was the
confirm.
intent, yes.
Okay.
I think it was to make the intent for both front yard and rear yard materials. Here's a list, but if you've got something that the zoning administrator thinks meets these criteria, okay, you can go that route too.
If we could confirm if that has made it into the updated code, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can double check to make sure that applies to both front and rear fences.
Are we able to talk about rear fence heights or no? I don't know if that's a Catherine question.
I think that would be up to the discretion of council.
What, it's 6 feet right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would the discussion be, higher or lower?
Higher. So I have many residents who frequently raise concerns about deer jumping 6 feet fences in their backyards and eating their gardens. And they want to be able to have a very transparent, opaque, higher fence in their backyards so that they can grow things and not be concerned about whether or not those things will be eaten by our local wildlife.
So you'd also have to have the sides or a sequestered area of that particular lot with that particular height.
I would think so. I mean, I think my understanding from CPW is that deer won't jump if they can't see where they're going to land. So I think that there's depending again on the uniqueness of the yard, they would either need to have a sequestered area or trees or some way of screening it off if we didn't allow higher fences. Thanks.
I think the deer situation, I spent a lot of time talking to the state wildlife people, and they actually brought most people down here to talk about it. There's really no way to ensure that deer will not get into your garden. They will find a way. And, people could perhaps build a cage, like a batting cage, over their, vegetables if they wanted to. That's about it. But, do we want 6, 8 foot, 10 foot? If we go to 7, or 8, people are going to want 10 because there's going to be a deer somewhere. I've seen bucks that they could jump over my house if they wanted to. So the deer, they were here before us, and they're not going anywhere. The only way, and we had to change hunting regulations so we could just kind of keep the population at bay, just, where it is so it doesn't get out of control. And so this is something that everybody struggles with. But I think just if we keep raising the height of the fences, there's always going to be someone who's going to want 10 feet. If we give them 6, they'll want 8. If we give them 8, they'll want 10. And there has to be a better solution, a greenhouse or, honestly, like a cage situation. I have seen that where people have, or chicken wire that they put over the top of their gardens. So I don't think that a higher fence is going to help the deer situation. It's one of those things that there's always going to be a deer who will jump 8 feet. Where I live on the northwest side of Canyon City, we've given up. We just live with them. We work with them. We work around them because we've tried everything, and you just can't keep them out of your vegetation. Thank you.
Is there any thought, or could there be thought about a structured garden that could be approved by planning or by you or by, so I don't envision someone wanting to put a 10-foot, maybe 10-foot whole fence around their house. I think that would be absurd. But I think maybe they would want to take a portion of their yard for a garden that would allow them to have a transparent type fencing that could exceed 6 feet, and within their own fencing, not a perimeter fence, which they could do anyway. Am I making any sense here?
I think what I hear you saying, Mr. Mayor, is, putting a, 8-foot wire fence or something around the garden itself. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and if that or razor wire, no, that something that would be, I'm sorry. We have them come up on our front porch, and they take my recliner all the time, and that's irritating, so I'm going to fence in my recliner. But I'm thinking that maybe the suggestion would be keep the 6-foot fence, but the suggestion, or could they do maybe the back portion and one of the sides that would be higher than, but transparent, like chicken wire or some other bigger type of fencing that would be taller than 6 feet to protect their garden. But I think you could do that if you came within your 6 feet. Well, we don't have any say within. Suppose I had a 6-foot fence around my house. I have one now, and within there I put a structure that would be 10 feet of certain type of see-through wire just to keep the deer out. I can do that without permission right now.
Well, you could certainly put accessory structures out there that would exceed 6 feet in height.
Yeah, you could do that now, can't you?
You can do that now. My recollection is the last time we had conversations with council about the 6-foot rear yard fence height limit, it came down to the fact that, as Councilmember Stein has pointed out, deer are going to find a way. The height is not going to necessarily serve as a deterrent 100% of the time, and if you keep increasing the height, you get another problem. You are, at that point, cutting off visual corridors, view corridors from neighbors' backyards. And ultimately, that was where a majority of council left this and decided not to change fence heights.
And I do hear you, I mean, in terms of cutting off view corridors, and I think that opacity if we were to, if there was a majority of council that was willing to consider increasing backyard fence heights, they definitely would need to be opaque, whether it was chicken wire or, I think, Tim had mentioned one of his neighbors has just like very fine wire that you don't even know that it's there.
So what you're suggesting is to keep it at 6 feet, but allow for an extended wiring.
Cable, like a cable kind of
over and
thing.
above that. And
Yeah.
that would make it okay, but the fence, the body of the fence itself would not be more than 6 feet.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously, you're going to have some deer maybe that are able to
Right.
jump over houses, but it would prevent more deer from getting into people's yards than.
Yeah,
Would that be acceptable? Would that be legal to?
I think we might want to talk to CPW about that, because I know when we had previous discussions with them, they were concerned about deer getting tangled in a lot of wire and causing additional issues.
So the suggestion would be to keep it at 6 feet, but allow for additional structures that would be transparent in some type, but not be dangerous. I don't know how you would define that, apparently not with,
I mean, you could put greenhouse structures out there as accessory structures on the property. That would be permissible now. You don't need any approval for that.
You can do that now.
Under a certain square footage from a building department standpoint.
120 square feet.
I think if it's under 200 square feet, it does not require any kind of a foundation.
Okay. What do we want to talk about? What direction? And I'd like to move on to tiny homes, or leave it the way it is, amend something.
What did we decide on the front yards?
Well, you have to leave the visual portion of it for safety more than anything. We're talking mostly about the backyard structure of fencing.
I think on the front yard, staff was just going to confirm whether or not there was
Materials
a
usage.
material usage
Materials, okay.
exemption. And they did confirm that there is, you can go to Board of Adjustment if you have a unique situation where you do need to have a higher fence in the front yard.
Yeah, we do have a variance process.
Okay, so we have that in hand, that could occur now. Okay.
And I guess I would just wonder if it sounds like Councilwoman Stein doesn't want to see any changes in backyard fences. I'm curious if Councilmember Hamrick, Councilmember Worthington, Councilmember Maloney have thoughts on it, so we know whether or not this is something that's worth further conversation or not. Thanks.
It does look like Councilmember Hamrick or Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick has his hand up.
I don't see his hand.
I do.
John.
I can attest that it's there.
Thank you. Yeah, it is
There
there.
it is. Now it's there.
And I've got two of them. Gee. But I just wanted to speak in support of the ideas that were put forward by our mayor and Councilmember Schmischer. I think it's important for us to be able to be flexible enough where we can to give people the ability to deal with the problems that they see and as they see fit. There are boundaries. We do have to be concerned about sightlines and things like that, but some type of transparency requirement for things over 6 feet interior to an exterior fence might be a way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Would we like to start here with Kathy?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I guess it depends on my mood at the moment, in a sense. I agree. I'm thinking of my old life, and we used to have issues with area lights that were placed on private property. And frankly, when we, as far as the utility, decided or was called to install one, the question was, okay, have you talked to your neighbors? Have you gotten their approval to have one, because this could impact their line of sight? their bedroom windows and things that way. I'm seeing this in the same sense in a way as far as the fencing is concerned, simply because if both, say it's just two neighbors side by side and they have the same issue and they're comparing their cucumbers to their squash together, they might want that 8-foot fence and have no problem as far as the line of sight. So again, I think this gets back to when it goes to the Board of Adjustment, looking at it as a gray area and making sure on an individual basis as to which way it should go. So that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but I think it all depends on the situation, and it depends on the individual and the neighbors that are involved.
Thank you, Kathy. Jared?
I thought some sort of transparent wire cable system around the top would deter deer, but apparently that's an issue that deer might get tangled in it, so that I'll retract my statement about that. That doesn't sound like a good idea anymore. So I really don't have an opinion other than I must have lazy deer around my house because they don't jump my 6-foot fence. I don't know why. I have plenty of deer and a 6-foot fence.
Do you have squash or cucumbers? Or-
Yeah.
You do?
Garden, yeah. Bushes, all kinds of stuff. That's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. Andrea? You've already,
We need to involve, if we decide we want to do something where we get, the fences are higher and higher, we really need to talk to the state game people, because they might have some issues about that. And when Tim and I talked to them about keeping the deer population down, there were a lot of things that I really didn't understand or know about the game population in this area. And there's deer are they're not just cute things that you want to take pictures of in your backyard. They have certain paths that they're going to follow no matter what, and certain things they're going to do. And if there's if we keep making the fences higher, that could be a problem for the game people. So whatever we do, if we're going to make changes like that, we do need to bring them into the discussion.
Amy?
I really like Council Member Worthington's idea, and I think that that's really what it's all about, is flexibility and what individual people need and what works for them and their neighbors. Is there a way to build that kind of flexibility or that kind of process into our UDC so that if folks are having a problem and their neighbors are fine with a higher fence, that they can seek that variance? So that it's not like this is the new standard and now suddenly everybody's fences are getting higher and higher, but when people have fruit trees that are getting, munched up or what have you, that there's a way that they can resolve those issues.
Well, can't they go to the Board of Adjustment now, or?
Not
No?
for fence height. This, the Board of Adjustment is more so for unique situations with property layouts and things like that. I don't know. We would have to look into a way to do that. I don't know if, we'd probably have to talk to Catherine a little bit and see if there would be a way to do that. I'd have to think about
So could you do
a
it?
conditional type of use, I guess.
Yeah, a special use, and every neighbor within 100 feet of it then could possibly sign off. Something like that? Just using a number? You look pensive.
I am not a fan of heights over 6 feet. 6
Okay.
feet height for a fence is human scale. When you go above that, it begins to have sort of the aroma of creating an exclusive enclave kind of look and feel to it, and I don't know how appropriate that is for Canyon City.
Again, definitely hear you and would want there to be a very high level of opacity, and I really like the idea of it being individual, unique circumstances. But I also want people to be able to, react to the life that, of where they are living if their deer are more adventurous than Councilmember Maloney's.
That's a definite maybe or something like that.
I like the idea of there being flexibility. If folks are okay with Administrator Stevens looking into that and exploring if folks can take it to the Board of Adjustment, if they have a unique circumstance, if there's a way to give folks that option, I think that might be our way to, that might be a really nice way forward that protects some of the concerns that have been raised while also enabling people to have the flexibility to enjoy their homes to the maximum amount possible. Thanks.
Can that be put into a task of the Board of Adjustment?
Well, I don't know about that. We'd have to look into, I don't know that it would be something that we would send to the Board of Adjustment. I don't think that would be the appropriate place for that. We would have to look at some type of probably conditional use rather than sending it to Board of Adjustment.
And that would come to council?
Conditional use does not, special review use does.
Who gets conditional use?
It's administrative approval.
Administrative thing, okay.
My last comment is we've been talking about this for 2 years, and we cannot come up with a better solution than what we have written now. So frankly, all we're doing is, again, trying to kick this down the street another few months and put it on staff's deal. I think we better just, until we come up with a better idea, I think we need to leave as is. And that's my recommendation.
Is this a thumbs up or thumbs down or a vote?
I think it's just discussion.
Yeah, it's discussion or
Just it? Okay.
direction. So.
What's the direction?
I would want City Administrator Stevens to review, to explore whether or not a conditional use permit process might be, or a special review use permit process, if there might be a way to look at flexibility. I hear you, Councilmember Worthington, that we've been talking about this for a long time, but I think that I think your idea tonight is not one that we have actually talked about before. And I think that it is a nice way of giving people flexibility while also not creating a new standard. So I think it's worth exploring.
Is that, so we're going to direct the administrator to look into the possibility of awarding a special use, administratively, a special use for a different type of guardian-type fence?
And I think that if that would have to come to council as a UDC change, so like council would have to vote on it, but I don't even know if there's enough support on council to make it worth Administrator Stevens' time.
I think we would have to come back to a committee meeting before we ever brought it to a UDC, or to, an omnibus change. So I've heard leave it as it is, I've heard move forward, so I've got 1 and 1.
I understand. I think, that there is potential. The thing is that you're going to end up having to have, in a special use permit, you're going to have all the neighbors approve it. You're going to have, and so, I mean, if there's one that says not only no, but heck no, then it's a dead issue, as far as I'm looking at it from my experience. So, but it doesn't mean that you can't have an exception to the rule, and so I have no problem with checking that out.
Again, what is that direction, to have him look into the possibility of a special review use for a variance from the fence regulation? Can you do that? Is that clear as mud?
Jerry?
Yes, I'll agree.
John's online?
John, I see your hand.
Yes, and I agree that we need to we shouldn't shelve this. We should move forward with exploring how we can make it better for our citizens. Thank you.
John, where would that go? That's all I'm asking anybody here. Where does that go next? Board of Adjustment, a plan of attack from administrator, from the planning director, from a, where?
So I would support Councilmember Schmischer's suggestion that we have the administrator do a little bit more work here to see if there's something we can do.
Okay, we'll try and come up with an idea and bring it
Okay.
back.
All right, let's put that one to rest. We're going to go give it a try. We're going to try something. I have 6 kids, that they all say that. I'm sorry. All right. Is that, let's go to tiny homes. I guess the question that I have is, we need to probably have some clarity. I know that in subdivisions that are done nowadays, there's a minimum square footage dealt by an architectural control committee, the same way with fences, the same way with yards, and everything else. So would this only apply to lots that are not covenanted?
Yes.
Yes. So this would apply to a lot that may have a whole house torn down, and someone wants to build on a pad or on a perimeter foundation, a tiny home of 500 square feet.
We can correct the zoning code so that that's not an issue. You still got the component of the building code has got to be addressed in order for this to happen.
So that has to come back for discussion with our chief building official.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, let's do that in the new council. Yes, go ahead, Amy.
I just have one more question about that. Catherine, I think I heard you say that, or sorry, Patrick, that if we adopt that we would have to adopt the tiny home annex of the
Appendix Q.
appendix to the IRC, would that trigger then the state energy requirements?
I don't know the answer to that
It's a
question.
question for Catherine. Sorry, Patrick.
Yes, it would. And I don't mean to imply that you would have to adopt that appendix. I think Patrick and I were simply pointing out that there was an appendix that was not adopted by the city, so it doesn't have those regulations, but there may be creative ways to work around that, so we're not triggering that energy conservation code update if the city is concerned about that. I know we've had some discussions about, the city's home rule authority in that respect, and so that's probably a bigger conversation, but we might be able to figure something out if council wants to move forward, and link it to portions of the building code that are already in place. So we just need to explore that more, and I think I'm hearing you want it explored is the direction I think I'm hearing, or the consensus.
Definitely. Thanks.
Either that or only in the alternative, you could put in a minimum square footage for a residence. They do that in covenants. Some are 1,400, some are 1,100. Could you say the minimum that would be allowed?
Do
on
you
any
really
resident?
want your code to be that prescriptive?
Covenants are.
Well, yeah, but covenants aren't something that the city enforces. If the city adopts it, it becomes a standard citywide no matter where you are. And do you really want to be that prescriptive?
Well, I think a
My
covenant's-
sense is probably not.
I think a covenant supersedes whatever the city would say, because it's in your deed.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah.
a covenant is an agreement between property owners within a
Right.
particular neighborhood. If the city adopts something, that's the standard citywide, and everyone has to comply with it. I don't know that the city should be that prescriptive.
Okay.
Patrick, I have a question, quick one. Is there a reason, and Catherine too maybe, is there a reason that, do we already have zoning or, rulings for trailers, like trailer parks? Why wouldn't that be similar to what we would apply to tiny homes?
So that's an interesting question. We do have two zones in which mobile homes are allowed right now. One is MH1 Mobile Home Park, the other one is MH2 Mobile Home Subdivision. So presumably, there is a possibility of creating a zone district that specifically applies to tiny homes. Bear in mind that there's going to be a scale difference. In a typical residential subdivision, where you're talking RL, R1, R2, R3, you're going to have a lot size that's usually in the range of, say, 4,500 to 6,000, maybe 8,000 square feet, or larger if you're getting into lower densities. And then if you put a tiny home on that, you're going to have a lot and not a lot of building mass. If you have a zone district that is specifically designed and bespoke for tiny homes, you're going to end up with a much smaller lot size that won't be able to accommodate things like traditional stick-built houses or minimum requirements for a manufactured home or a mobile home. So while that is an option, I want to caution you, that's going to be an option that would really only be applicable to tiny homes. You wouldn't be able to put too many of any other kind of home there.
So, and from what I have seen and talked to people who actually build them, they all have similar requirements. I mean, a lot of them they're very similar to trailers. They have, bathrooms, kitchens, and they're going to need electrical hookups. They're going to need, sewer and water. And so, but they're very limited in size. So maybe it would make sense to, treat them not like a trailer park, but like it'd be a community of tiny homes, which would kind of get us out of the problem of, trying to work them into regular lot sizes or, having them carve out smaller lot sizes. I mean, it just seems like it would be so much easier and it would be more cost effective for, say, a group of 10 or 20 of them to share the costs, development costs, for them to get the hookups.
I think theoretically, at least under, MH1, which allows modular homes or factory-built homes, you could do something like that. You could do a smaller scale type of development that that could potentially happen with, tiny homes or smaller format housing.
So we have that ability under the code we already have?
Yeah, the issue that we have right now is that our code, the land use code, specifically the UDC, is silent on tiny homes. If we fix that, then presumably you could see, a mobile home park wanting to, define itself so that it's got these areas where you can locate tiny homes at that point. I think the bigger question is, if we're going to do that, what are going to be the building component requirements that have to come into play there? So I think the code fix is less of an issue than the building fix.
So, again, let's call them something else. Just little houses. And if you had a regular lot that a house burnt down on, you tear it off, and I wanted to build a home on a foundation or a pad of 500 square feet, can I do that? In Canyon City, here.
I think with some tweaks to the UDC, yes. The question is, what are you going to have to do in terms of a building permit to comply? And
So-
that, I don't have the ability to answer tonight.
Well, what would your tweaks be? There's
We have
no-
to define what a tiny home is to differentiate it from any
Well,
other
I'm
kind
not-
of
Well,
home.
again, I think, the state definition that I think Catherine used was it 400 square feet? Less than 400 square feet?
Yeah, no, a maximum of 400
Yeah.
square feet.
So if you're talking about building a 500 square foot home, I don't see that there would be any
Well, I don't
restriction
either.
on that.
That's, you're just getting afraid away from the fact that we're calling them tiny homes.
Yeah.
It's just a little house. And and then the question would be to our building official, would just have to be the regular insulation and electrical and all that would conform to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that Appendix Q, and, not knowing specifically what it says, but from, dealing with, tiny home manufacturers in other communities, I know that there were issues in the building code about clearance. You had to have certain clearance from the electrical panel and certain things that the regular building code requires, and that Appendix Q, I believe, solves for some of those types of issues.
And again, you're going down the path of a manufactured home elsewhere. I'm talking about a site-built stick home
Yep.
of 500 square feet on a lot in Canyon City.
If you're doing stick-built 500 square feet, I think that,
Be okay.
yeah, you'd be fine, yeah.
Okay.
Going back to Councilmember Schmischer's comments earlier about setbacks, the setbacks are something that you can't exceed. You can't get closer to that. So I don't know what the zoning concern was that you're hearing, because what I'm looking at, we have maximum coverage ratios, not minimum coverage ratios. And, all of the setbacks, as long as they're within those setbacks, you can build smaller. The setbacks are to try and keep people from overbuilding too close to the other property lines.
I'll make sure to go back to those citizens and have those conversations in more detail and get the specific code citations that they were concerned about and invite them when we
Yeah.
have the next meeting with the building official. Because I think my concern as well would be, we would want people to be able to stick build a 380 square foot house or what have you without little hiccups in the UDC that it sounds like are unintentional anyway.
So we'll do some more
Okay.
research on tiny homes and bring that back. It looks like we'll probably need to do a UDC omnibus, or was 6 or 7?
No, this will be 6.
6, to at least bring the definition into the UDC.
Okay, because at some point in time, you're probably going to be confronted with someone that wants to build a tiny home community. And we don't have anything appropriate for that at this time. I think that's because of the cost of building and the cost of housing and everything else. That's a possibility. Salida did it. Didn't work real well, but they did it.
Then I think we'd be ill-advised to copy what Salida did.
Yeah. I'm not suggesting that, by the way. I'm just saying that you may be confronted in the future with someone, I don't know it, with a piece of land that wants to build tiny homes, which would have small lots and have all the facilities required, but because of the cost of that construction, it makes it affordable for them. It's kind of like them wanting to have their own studio apartment, basically. So you're going to work on that. Anybody else? All right. I guess we're adjourned then. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick.